Hey, my friends, welcome back. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Behind Them Walls with your girl, Anna B. We're going to jump right into part 4 of Women Serving Life in Oklahoma. Teresa Renee Red was charged with first-degree murder in the death of her 9-month-old daughter, Lenora. Lenora died October of 1996 while at the Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City. Lenora was first taken to Edmond Regional Hospital by her mother, but transferred after she reported Lenora to be having issues with her breathing. Teresa was accused of suffocating Lenora. She was arrested before the medical examiner even ruled Lenora's death to be a homicide. On top of that, authorities reopened the investigation into the death of Teresa's 6-month-old son, Stephen Red, who died in 1985. His death was ruled as SIDS. Prosecutors accused Teresa of suffocating Lenora when the two were left in the hospital room alone together. Doctors reported Lenora to be healthy and perfectly normal, but they kept her anyway as a sympathy admit because of Stephen's passing 11 years prior. A cardiac monitor was attached to Lenora to check her breathing. On October 15, 1996, a nurse found baby Lenora laying on her back in the hospital crib on a pillow with her gown pulled underneath her arms. The monitor showed a flat line. The alarm light was on, but there was no sound coming from it as it should have been. Lenora was gray and limp. When the nurse lifted Lenora, she noticed the cardiac leads on Lenora were not in their proper places. Police say a fight then occurred between Teresa and the nurses as they were attempting to revive baby Lenora. Teresa tackled one of the nurses, a detail denied by both she and her defense attorney at the time, after her December 20th arrest. Her attorney argued that if the cardiac leads had been moved at any time, the alarm would have sounded. He said the alarm may not have sounded when Lenora stopped breathing because of a mechanical failure. He called Teresa's arrest an injustice, her arrest leading to her depression and separation from her 4-year-old surviving child. The assistant district attorney at the time said the charge against Teresa would not have been filed if the facts did not fit the elements of first-degree murder. The terrible injustice is that somebody has murdered a baby. An autopsy showed evidence that Lenora was suffocated, and the state medical examiner had finally ruled Lenora's death as a homicide. There were also bruises on Lenora's neck. Now, Stephen, he died after a sudden onset of apnea. He was hospitalized for a few before he was sent home on an apnea monitor. He died several days later. The detective that led the investigation believed Teresa was suffering from Munchausen syndrome. Reportedly, Lenora's dad, Teresa's boyfriend, had wanted to date other people and told her the night before Teresa took Lenora to the hospital. They argued that day, and it is believed that Teresa was either trying to get back at Lenora's father or trying to get him back, and she indeed liked the attention. Teresa's trial was held from November 17th to December 9th, 1997. She was tried by a jury which found her guilty as charged and set her punishment at life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She was sentenced on December 12th and entered Mable Bassett on January 8th, 1998. Tina Honeycut was living in a trailer 4 trailers down from where she lived with her ex-husband until she was kicked out on November 19th of 95. Not too long afterwards, his new girlfriend, 25-year-old Frida Jones, moved in. Tina had never changed her name after the two divorced in 1991, but often used her maiden name, Kelly. 31 years old, she was upset and jealous that her ex had his new girlfriend living at the trailer they once shared. On November 30th of 95, a witness observed Tina and Frida arguing in the front yard before Frida went back inside her trailer and locked the door. 5 days prior, Tina told a friend of both her and her ex-husband that she was going to kill Frida. She was going to get them both, even if she had to burn that trailer down. After Frida went inside and locked the trailer door, not too long afterwards, Tina approached, armed with a .22 caliber rifle, with her son about 20 feet behind her. Witnesses said her child kept trying to get his mother to leave. Tina shot into the trailer, broke the front door glass with the butt of the gun, reached in and unlocked the door. Meanwhile, Frida had climbed out the trailer's bedroom window. As she began to run across the yard to get away from Tina, she was shot in the back. She fell to the ground. Witnesses to the shooting said Tina glanced at Frida, picked up items that had fallen from her purse, and left the scene. Frida was still alive when Roger County authorities arrived, obviously in pain and having trouble breathing, but she was able to tell an officer, Tina Honeycut shot her, and that she was in a red blazer. Frida had been transported to St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa, but she later died. Tina, on the other hand, was arrested several hours later at the Swifty Mart on Oklahoma 20. Her 9-year-old son was still with her. A jury deliberated nearly 11 hours to return a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and first-degree burglary. The jury recommended 20 years on the burglary charge, but they were deadlocked on Tina's sentence for the first-degree murder charge. Ultimately, the court sentenced Tina to life without parole plus the 20 years for the burglary. The judge said she observed no remorse throughout the trial. She saw nothing to indicate that the victim, Frida, was shown any mercy, saying, "You didn't even walk over to see if she was dead or alive." Tina claimed she shot out of fear for her son's safety, and it was clear from the testimony during trial, from the witnesses to the shooting, that Tina was the only one that jeopardized the safety of her son and others that day. Tina has been at the Mable Bassett Correctional Center since June 6, 1996. Her appeal efforts have all failed. She wrote this letter to a judge in August 2016, seeking justice and equality. To her, that would be her release. May Frida Jones rest in peace. At 16 years old, Jessica Moore pleaded no contest in November 2002 to first-degree murder for the death of 76-year-old Thelma Sauls. Thelma was Jessica's grandmother. Jessica had stabbed the elderly woman to death in her home on July 17, 2002. Jessica was adopted by her parents at 19 months old. In 2002, Jessica was living with her mother and her grandmother. Her parents were no longer together. Jessica and her grandmother often clashed over her grandmother's discipline ways. But most of the disagreements centered around Jessica bringing boys into their home when her mom was gone. One of Thelma's 5 daughters said Jessica and her mother had fought the night before she was killed, also saying that everybody else thought Jessica was blowing smoke, but she had warned her mother, Thelma. She warned her something bad was going to happen. She could just sense it. Jessica attempted to recruit at least 8 other juveniles as young as 11 to help her kill her grandmother. Several were actually present in the house, but left before the stabbing occurred. 80-pound Thelma was stabbed in a back room at least 3 times. She crawled from that room to the front of her home before she died. A large wooden-handled kitchen knife was found across the street from Thelma's home. A 12-year-old boy faced the same charges. He ultimately entered a plea that's equivalent to a guilty plea in juvenile court. More than likely, he was held at a juvenile detention center until he turned 19 years old. Jessica decided to waive her rights to a preliminary hearing, which gave up any chance for her to be tried as a juvenile or a youthful offender. She was 15 at the time she committed this crime. She will have to serve at least 38 years at Mable Bassett before consideration of release or parole. In 2021, she had a short victory when the district court granted her post-conviction relief. However, the state appealed that ruling, and they won. This was due to the Supreme Court McGritt ruling not being retroactive. The order was vacated. Her conviction and sentence were reinstated later that year. She's been at Mable Bassett since January 7th, 2003. Shanda Rogers is serving a life sentence after being convicted in 2002 of the first-degree murder of her 3-year-old daughter, Shaquita, and permitting child abuse for the abuse her surviving son endured. James Lawrence Mitchell III, Shawanda's boyfriend, was convicted the following year and sentenced to death for the crimes committed against both Shawanda's children. His conviction was overturned when an appeals court ruled inadmissible evidence had been used against him. In 2008, another jury in Oklahoma County found Mitchell guilty for Shaquita's death and the abuse of her older brother, sentencing him to death for a second time. Shanda and her children moved from Louisiana to Oklahoma City in 1998. She and the kids moved in with James July of 2000. While Shanda worked, James stayed home with the kids. July 23, 2000, after taking Shanda and dropping her off at work, he began to make several calls to Shawanda's hotel job, telling coworkers it was important that Shanda needed to call home immediately. By the 6th, 7th call, he was saying Shaquita, 3-year-old Shaquita, was having seizures, never calling 911 or taking her to the hospital for any type of medical assistance. Coworkers continued to tell Shanda that she needed to go home and check on her baby, but instead she completed her shift at the hotel and was picked up by James between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. Mind you, the calls had started as early as 8:15 a.m. When they returned home, instead of her calling 911 or her taking Shaquita to the hospital for help, she called her aunt, told her Shaquita was having a seizure, and asked for a ride to the emergency room, despite James being present and having a car. And they only lived blocks away from the hospital while her aunt lived across town. Her aunt told her to call an ambulance, but Shanda continued to insist on being driven. Eventually, Shanda and both children were picked up by her uncle, arriving at OU Medical at 4:20 p.m. Shaquita was in respiratory failure and having seizures upon her arrival. She was bruised from head to toe. A CT scan showed bleeding on her brain, massive swelling of the left side, pushing her brain over. Her injuries suggesting Shaquita suffered more than one strike injury to her head. An additional CT scan of her abdomen showed swelling around her liver, possible injury to her spleen and pancreas, and bleeding in her left kidney. After the CT scan of her abdomen, Shaquita stopped breathing on her own, and she was taken to the pediatric intensive care unit. But by the time she arrived there, she had no brain or brain stem function. Shaquita was pronounced dead the next day, July 24th, 2000 at 3:30 p.m. Doctors that examined and treated Shaquita believed she had died from child abuse. James voluntarily spoke with detectives the next day. While his story continued to change, from Shaquita falling off the bed, even blaming her brother for her injuries, as well as her mother, he eventually admitted to him losing control, blacking out, and causing the injuries. Because of his sister's injuries, Shawanda's son was also checked out, and he too had bruising on various parts of his body. In 2011, after being convicted and sentenced to death twice, James appealed, raising 19 propositions of error. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals agreed with 3. His conviction was affirmed, but his death sentence was amended to life without parole. James is at Oklahoma State Reformatory, Granny, while Shanda has been at Mable Bassett since March 28, 2002. Patricia Jordan was 46 years old when she told jurors that she had to kill her husband or be killed. The Oklahoma County jury had the option of finding her guilty of the lesser charge manslaughter or first-degree murder. District Attorney Patty High said Patricia was trying to use the battered woman syndrome, a trendy defense, but the jury saw through that, finding her guilty of first-degree murder and recommending a life sentence. Prosecutors said Patricia held a pillow to her husband's head as he slept on September 22, 1996, firing 2 shots into the back of Jerry Jordan's head. She then sawed his legs off his body and stuffed the rest of his 300-pound-plus frame into a trash bin behind their home. Some of Jerry's body parts were never found. Jerry's nephew, a police officer, discovered the gruesome scene 2 weeks later when he went looking for his missing uncle. Patricia showed no emotion during the 2-week trial or when the verdict was being read. There was no dispute from prosecutors that there was violence in Patricia and Jerry's relationship, both at some point filing protective orders against each other. Prosecutors mentioned Jerry was arrested on assault and battery charges against Patricia, but it was she who bailed him out. Patricia testified that she was abused, she was forced into prostitution, and she was afraid to leave her husband. Initially, she told police she didn't remember what happened to Jerry, but she admitted to jurors that she killed him. Her claims of abuse were exaggerated, said prosecutors, who also said Patricia willingly worked as a prostitute to make money. Jerry's death had a major impact on his family and friends, especially his son, Jerry Jr., who found out the day before his father's body was found that he and his wife were expecting their first child, which would have been Jerry's first grandchild. May Jerry rest in peace, and I send sincere condolences to the Jordan family. June 20th, 2001, at the Quail Creek Apartments, an altercation between Kesha Glover and her 40-year-old partner, Philip Davis, resulted with Davis dying from a stab wound to his heart with a 12-inch butcher knife. Kesha testified at her trial that Philip was accusing her of having an affair and he was jealous. She told Philip she and her child was leaving, and that's when the altercation began, further saying Philip lunged at her and fell on the knife. On June 26, 2001, she was arrested and charged with Philip's murder. Her trial started September 23, 2002. She was found guilty of second-degree murder, and the jurors recommended life in prison. However, before Kesha could be sentenced, which was scheduled for November 15th of that year, her defense counsel filed an application to determine her competency and moved for a new trial on the grounds of newly discovered evidence. The court-ordered psychological evaluation found that Kesha had mild mental retardation. At a post-evaluation hearing, the trial court concluded that she was competent, but it granted her motion for a new trial and later her motion for a second competency determination. A trial was conducted on Kesha's competency, and the jury found that she was not incompetent to undergo further criminal proceedings. After a second criminal trial concluded in 2004, Kesha was convicted of second-degree murder. The jury again recommended a life sentence, which she did receive. She's been at Mable Bassett Correctional Center since January 20th, 2005. A jury convicted Shaquita Buer of Tulsa for the shooting death of 22-year-old Emily Clark. Emily was shot in the head at an apartment complex near Admiral and Highway 169 in February 2013. A witness who lived in the apartment told police she was in the hallway and heard the gunshot. According to the arrest report, the witness told police she walked into the front room and saw someone taking a gun away from Shaquita. She told police Shaquita said Emily had snitched. Emily Clark was friendly with both Shaquita and her boyfriend, Michael. On the day Emily died, she was stopped by the police for suspected prostitution. She was not arrested, but officers escorted her back to her motel room where she was living. This is where police encountered Shaquita's boyfriend, Michael, and his brother, Darius. Darius had an outstanding warrant and he was arrested. An officer led Darius to believe, as well as Michael, that Emily had snitched on him, disclosing where Darius was and stated that he should go to jail. Now, this officer actually testified, per the appeal documents, that he lied about Emily snitching because she was rude to him during their initial encounter. So fast forward, later that evening, Shaquita, Michael, and Emily were having dinner at that crowded apartment. After Darius's arrest, Emily wound up shot in the head, and several witnesses testified that they saw Shaquita holding the gun. Shaquita was charged with first-degree murder, and her defense theory was that Michael shot Emily. Michael testified against Shaquita at the preliminary hearing, but he actually died before her trial started. The state presented the transcript from that hearing along with evidence from a jailhouse informant who testified that Shaquita admitted to shooting the victim at Michael's urging. After a 3-day trial, the jury convicted Shaquita of first-degree murder. The state court sentenced her to life imprisonment. Patricia was married to her husband, Arthur Bernie, for 16 years. They lived in a rural area near Coweta, Oklahoma, with their 14-year-old daughter, Michelle. In 2002, Patricia began an affair, telling her lover that her husband, who was very much alive, was already dead. After a bad fall in September of that year, Arthur's wife and his youngest daughter began to wish death upon him. Over the next few months, they tried poisoning Arthur to death, but failed. When that didn't work, they started offering to pay someone if they would kill Arthur. Later on, Michelle met Michael Richardson online, a 17-year-old boy who lived in Oklahoma City. February 15, 2011, mother and daughter met Michael for the first time. He gave Patricia 3 morphine pills to use to kill Arthur, but again, their murder plan failed. 2 days later, Michelle directly offers Michael $6,000, some weed, and sex with her if he and 2 friends would kill her father. The next day, mother and daughter drove in a rented car to pick Michael and more pills up. Patricia, Michelle, and Michael returned to the Bernie's trailer. Patricia gave Michael a .22 caliber rifle, and he and Michelle went out on the property for some practice shots. That day, right before 5 p.m., Patricia texted Michelle, "He's here." Michelle locked Michael in the barn that Arthur had built. Michael was waiting for Arthur. When Arthur entered the barn, he unlocked the tack room, opened the door, and was shot in the face. He fell to his death. Michael hid the murder weapon under the trailer skirting before meeting Patricia and Michelle at the end of their driveway, telling the wife and daughter that their father and husband was dead. Patricia then drove Michael and Michelle to a mall before she went out and had dinner with her lover. All 3 of them returned back to the Bernie property at about 7:30. Patricia went out to the barn, found Arthur, and called 911.
My husband, I guess, is failing and there's blood all over the place. I can't make him get up.
Is he awake at all?
No.
Is he breathing?
I can't tell.
Okay. And you said there's blood all over him?
Blood all over it, all over the place.
The call was made a little after 8 p.m. At 9 p.m., while emergency responders were still with Arthur, Patricia sends her lover a text that says, "I love you." After being told her husband's death had been ruled a homicide, Patricia provided a voluntary statement to police detailing her day, also telling them that Arthur was aware of her affairs and that he was okay with it as long as he didn't know the details. A friend of Michelle's went to law enforcement on February 22nd. That conversation led to a search of the Bernie property, and that is when law enforcement officials discovered the .22 caliber rifle Michael stashed. The bullet from Arthur's head was too fragmented for testing to confirm that the rifle was the murder weapon. But by this time, Michael had admitted to using the rifle to shoot Arthur, implicating both Michelle and Patricia. Michael and Michelle's DNA was discovered on the rifle. Michelle also confessed after she was arrested, and both teens testified against Patricia. In return for Michelle's testimony, she was prosecuted as a juvenile, and the state agreed not to seek the death penalty against her murderous mother. Patricia was tried and convicted in 2012. She ultimately was sentenced to life without parole. Michael pled guilty for his role in the murder and was given a 28-year sentence. Michelle was released. She's now married with children of her own and is believed to be living in Arizona. Arthur also had 2 adult daughters who deeply loved their father. I send my deepest condolences to both of them and pray that they're able to remember the happy times they've had with their beloved father. May he rest in peace.